seminal work, right, The Golden Gulag, in Portuguese, which has been published in Brazil. And maybe, Mesa, you'd like to say a couple of words about it. You want to use the mic?
Thank you. So what you see here in these slides that our colleagues prepared from Brazil is that this is the publication of Golden Gulag in Brazil. And our colleague, Bruno Xavier, who translated the book, was a visiting scholar at CPCP in 2015. And he had kind of an intense experience in New York City. He was out with a friend one night, and then he saw the police harassing a person on the streets, a homeless person. And of course, he tried to intervene. And he got arrested. He spent a day in jail. He did community work, cleaning the streets of New York City. And he was deported. He lost his visa. He was deported back to Brazil. So we have been talking about the importance of publishing Ruthie's work in Brazil for a while, and Bruno was able to do this collective amazing project. The publisher is connected with the geography department at the University of São Paulo, and we all have a close connection with CPCP. We have Fabio, Cecilia, Tawane here. We are all from geography from USP. And also we have some quotes from activists from Brazil. And one thing that Bruno told me is like, I don't know if Ruthie really understands how important this book is for Brazilian activists. So they really wanted me to express that. And also, the book is so beautiful. The cover design is amazing. The layout is amazing. So I'm going to pass around this copy for you to actually have it in your hands and see. And then at the end, whoever finishes, please return the book to me or to Ruthie. So thank you very much.
So thanks again, everyone, for coming. This entire conference is a labor of love for Ruthie. And before we begin the first panel, I just want to present to her this artwork made by Shalene Rodriguez for her. And you will see it also on the poster. There are posters and a limited number of these bags available for folks. If you are a person who's been invited to speak, I have bags for you separately, so you don't need to, trample other people to get one of the bags over there. If you don't get a bag today, you might keep an eye out tomorrow because there will be some more. And there are also tubes for those of you who are, poster people, so that you can bring your posters home safe.
Thank you, Mary. I also wanted to extend personal thanks to Mary for carrying the heavy load of organizing this conference. Thanks so much. I'm only saying that because I might get a bag, So maybe we'll move on to our first panel. As kind of a preface to that, let me say that one of the things that Ruthie's got used to is how the Center for Place, Culture and Politics works, or sometimes doesn't work, right? And so we thought we'd also, in this first panel, reflect upon the history of the center, which occupies a very special position at the Graduate Center. And sometimes a thorny position, since we have that word politics in our name, right? And there are folks within CUNY and at the Graduate Center who would rather we just talk about culture or something like that, right? Culture. And that's actually not what we do. And that's why when Ruthie came to the GC, given her work, given her activism, given her inspirations, she was such a perfect fit for the center, and was not only able to develop the work of this center, but expand its reach. And we've had all kinds of activities on the basis of Ruthie's presence working with the center, and it's an attraction to graduate students. We have graduate fellows at the center every year, and also, of course, 6 faculty fellows who we must and otherwise. So if I could invite up the members of this panel, we'll get started. And there'll be I think probably a very minor break between the first 2 panels, and then we'll continue with the keynote dialogue between Rabab and Ruthie. David is here. You might have to turn the mics on. Maitri? Maitri Prasad, postdoctoral fellow.
Could we just have the photographs just scrolling? That's okay. Thank you.
I could get one.
Have this one for now. You want to sit down?
No, it's fine. I'll wait for the chair to come.
I think we can inch around a little more. Inch away, Peter.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again. So, this panel is about 24 years of the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics. So we are just short of, 25 years. So we'll have another big one next year, I hope. And I kept thinking today and yesterday about how CPCP opened my brains, and to use some keywords from the bios I've been reading, will be reading out today. How it taught me to think through my ambivalence about communism. I was sharing it with Ruthie. So, it is about culture in a particular way, because, that ambivalence is indeed about, it's a cultural feeling. And I was trying to think about the day I walked into CPCP, probably late 2019, if you can believe it, just before the pandemic. And I was trying to think, what did I see? I don't remember, because most of what, that around the pandemic I've blocked off. But I imagine I must have seen this wonderful poster framed there called "The Party is Not Over," it says. And it's from 2004. And so you think, oh, this is early 2000s. The party is not over. Is this about the partying that they've been doing here? Or, it's not over yet? Or is it about, some party the party that existed, and, nobody saw it, nobody saw the collapse of it, or the, it getting over. So it really, I could see that this CPCP is a refuge as much as for me, as for, everyone who passed through it. And it is a place of refuge for people who were activists or communists, or are activists and communists. So, I thought of, how did some people gravitate to this, to academia as a place to exist radically? How did they think of it, especially in the US? And how did the state and capital come to not just tolerate this, but also fund this? So that was interesting. And I was also thinking about, just cut to the present, the encampments in our universities, how they were, brutally removed. So this generation that, who were in the encampments are younger than the CPCP. They are, not 24 probably yet, most of them. So I was thinking about the inseparability of thinking and doing and thinking. And, there's no need to, I think what CPCP taught me is that, you don't have to overthink your doing, and you don't have to underthink your doing either. So, and how the center and everyone at the center bring together this thinking and doing in unique ways. So that's what I think CPCP offers as solidarity, that space to think and act, or space to think and do. And I'm really thankful for that. With that note of gratitude, let me start the bios. I've substantially cut them short because nobody can read all of these, bios.
We're just going to go through David's book title. Yes. And then the conference will be over.
And forgive me if, I mispronounce words or names. Candice, so I'm going to start. Candice Chu is a professor of English, American Studies, and Critical Social Psychology at the CUNY Grad Center, where she's also affiliated to Africana Studies and Liberal Studies. She teaches and writes about the relationship of aesthetics, uncommon sense, and insurgent pedagogy. Chu has served in administrative roles in American Studies, English, and the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics at the Grad Center, and is a member of the steering committee for the newly established PhD program in Black, Race, and Ethnic Studies. She was president of the American Studies Association from 2017 to 18. Her publications include The Difference Aesthetics Makes, On the Humanities After Man, and Imagine Otherwise, on Asian Americanist Critique. She's currently working on a book of essays titled The Disinterested Teacher, and a research project on contemporary Asian racialization, studying Asia. David Harvey is a distinguished professor of anthropology and geography at the City University of New York and author of various books, articles, and lectures. His most recent books are a companion to Marxist Grunries and The Anti-Capitalist Chronicles. He is the author of 17 Contradictions, not any less, and The End of Capitalism, one of the Guardian's best books of 2011, The Enigma of Capital and The Crisis of Capitalism. Other books include A Companion to Marxist Capital, Limits to Capital, and Social Justice and the City. He was director of the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics from 2018 to 2014. Peter Hitchcock is professor of English at Baruch College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. He's also on the faculties of Women's Studies and Film Studies at the GC. His most recent publications include Accumulating Fictions for Representations, Immolation for the Routledge Companion to Literature and Human Rights, How to Read a Discipline for Comparative Literature, Defining the World in Literary Materialisms, and Everything Has Gone Green, The Environment of BP's Narrative for Imaginations. So that's our next year's topic, anti-capitalist environmentalisms. Forthcoming articles include an essay, Viscosity and Velocity, and another one on communism titled The Leninist Hypothesis. I'm going to stop there. There's more.
Those are both out.
Robin C. Spencer Antma is a historian who researches and writes about Black social protest after World War II, Urban and Working Class Radicalism and Gender. Her book, The Revolution Has Come, Black Power, Gender, and the Black Panther Party in Oakland, was published in 2016. She is co-founder of the Intersectional Black Panther Party History Project and has written widely on gender and Black power. Her writings have appeared in the Journal of Women's History and Souls, as well as the Washington Post, Vibe magazine, Color Lines, and The Truth Out. She has received awards for her work from the Mellon Foundation, the American Council of Learned Societies, and the Association of Black Women Historians. She's completing her second book on the intersections between the movement for Black liberation and the movement against the US war in Vietnam as a fellow at Harvard Charles Warren Center for Studies in American History in 2023-24. In addition, she's working on 2 biographies. The first focused on radical activist, scholar, and thinker Angela Davis, and the second focuses on Patricia Murphy Robinson, Black feminist psychotherapist. So, over to our speakers today.
Are we going in order? I guess we're going in order. I think we're going in order. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a beautiful thing to be here with you all. Beloved Ruthie and all of you, so many of you I haven't seen in such a long time. First, to start with gratitude to the organizers, Peter for inviting me onto this panel, to Mary, I don't know where Mary has gone, but thank you for all of the hard labor, to the People's Forum, to Ruthie, because Ruthie brought me into the CPCP in the first instance. I like to start always with thinking both about everybody who's in the room, but also who's not with us for whatever reason. And so to kind of, always feel them with us in these times and in these places, which is also a part of the work of CPCP. So I'll try to give a sense of that today. I thought I would start with just a quotation from Ruthie, which seems particularly resonant this week. Maybe always, but certainly this week in New York. Space always matters, and what we make of it in thought and practice determines, and is determined by, how we mix our creativity with the external world to change it and ourselves in the process. In other words, one need not be a nationalist, nor imagine self-determination to be fixed in modern definitions of states and sovereignty, to conclude that, at the end of the day, freedom is a place. How do we find the place of freedom? More precisely, how do we make such a place over and over and over again? This is from the essay Scholar, Activists in the Mix. I'm quoting from this essay in which Professor Gilmore, Ruthie, is concerned with explaining how, this is her words again, how the lively hyphen that articulates scholar and activist may be understood and enacted as a singular identity. She explains further, quote, "My interest is in proliferating rather than concentrating ways of thinking." That, for me, is a great synopsis of CPCP. I think it's a space interested in proliferating ways of thinking and doing toward the making and taking place of freedom. What you see scrolling on the screens are pictures from the 2 years I was formally affiliated to the CPCP. So that was after the era when David was director, so I'm really speaking to the time that Ruthie has been leading us, and along with Peter. I was formally affiliated, I think it was 2015-16, and then a couple of years later. I was initially a faculty fellow, and then I was acting Peter when Peter was acting Ruthie. And I think that was for a year. It might have been a little longer than a year. Yeah, we did our best. I tried really hard to do the British thing. I probably failed pretty badly. So CPCP, if you don't know, is comprised of directors and associate directors and assistant directors and faculty and dissertation fellows and a few postdocs and visiting scholars. We meet weekly over readings in the first semester of mostly already published things, if memory serves, and then in the second semester of each other's work. So with these pictures, I do habitually just collect pictures. I apologize if you're in them and you didn't know that I was sharing them. With these pictures, I wanted to share a specific sense of the place, the room that is CPCP at the Grad Center, but also a center that far exceeds that room, as well as some of the people who have inhabited it and the kind of work we've done. So interspersed, I think this is one of those images, are a photo celebrating David's birthday from, I think, 8 years ago now, if my math is correct. And the takedown of capitalism is happening in the figure of the piñata of Milburn penny bags of the Monopoly game. It was a particularly joyous occasion, as I recall. Yeah, and I think David took we all took quite a lot of pleasure in that evening. In short, CPCP takes place in an actual room, but makes and remakes spaces of freedom and corollary collectivities and communities and social formations and joy that spill over and take over and remake and sometimes simply share other spaces as we are doing today here. On this occasion, to reflect on 24 years of the CPCP, I'll talk a little about how and why I experience CPCP as a kind of infrastructural project and practice, one that develops capacities and creates the networks by which resources, intellectual, material, embodied, are shared for the sake of the collective to equip us to dismantle the master's house as such, and so that we may all rise in and for collective liberation. And here is my register for those of you familiar with abolition geography, Ruthie's collection of essays toward liberation. I'm echoing and collaging her insights with these phrases. In CPCP, we take and learn to take what exists, namely the imperfect institution that is the university, and repurpose it toward liberatory ends. These are lessons about refusing to waste what already exists, about which Ruthie has also written. I'll highlight 3 habits or lessons that are, for me, defining aspects of the project and practice of the CPCP, which allow it to be a project and practice to far exceed the physical bounds of the Graduate Center. So number 1, listen well and wait your turn to speak. Ruthie's going to know what I'm going to talk about. I can't recall the topic of conversation, but at some point during one of the seminar sessions, Ruthie kicked me under the table because I'd spoken out of turn. I'm pretty sure this only happened once, I think. I also stopped sitting next to her, and I started sitting across from her, but that's done. The seminar discussion works on the principle of stack, which I think is probably familiar to everyone here, which reflects the genuine and deliberately and rigorously democratic ethos of the center. Everyone, from the most distinguished and prominent to the greenest seminarian at the table, has a voice, and indeed it is expected to make use of it. In that way, we are compelled to be present to and listen to each other, and to learn to listen patiently and to disagree patiently, and thus in generative and generous ways. Ruthie's kick was a reminder that what we do in CPCP is develop and practice habits of mind grounded in the principle that everyone gets a turn. So I'm reminded in this vein of thought that Roderick Ferguson has recently emphasized habits of mind in a recent piece called The Interruption of Our Cowardice, developed in part in the company of writing by Edward Said and Martin Luther King Jr., as to the importance of curiosity and courage understood to be resources for intellection, especially within conditions of distinctly repressive state power. Aligning with institutions or state power, Gilmore, as well as Ferguson, Said, and King remind us, are not only a turning away from people and the plenitude with which we could live, but also, and relatedly, a way of killing off curiosity and intellectual life. So we practice in CPCP how to listen well and to wait to speak, which is to say, we practice how to be with and for each other. Habits, even at the most quotidian level, matter to the bigger project of worlding. Lesson 2, why this here, why this here now? During a seminar session, again, I can't recall the details, I remember saying something to the effect that I was interested in how things happened and with what consequences. I work primarily with literature and other aesthetic and cultural expression. And David responded with, well, that's all well and good, but it seemed like those questions kept us from asking what we really need to know, which is why. In the essay, Scholar Activists in the Mix, Ruthie offers a similar suggestion in recounting an exchange with a former student, quote, perplexed by her decision to earn a PhD in geography. When she asked why an activist lecturer on race, culture, and power would go to study where is Nebraska, Ruthie replied, that actually I was going to study why is Nebraska. On another occasion, I said something about my interest in time, and David said, why not place? I did this sort of thing a lot in this. It's not so surprising that if you hang out with geographers, they'll ask about place. But what I want to flag is that what's being cultivated here is a habit of asking what you're not asking when you frame a problem this way and not that. And the point is to ask questions that will help us, quote, learn how to interpret the world in order to change it. That's Ruthie's quotation. I'm sharing these exchanges in part because they're indicative of the thoroughly inter- and multi- and anti-disciplinary nature of CPCP. It is very much a space that is highly disciplined, but not in a disciplinary way. You do the work carefully, the reading, the thinking, the writing, but not for the sake of reproducing or buttressing disciplinary knowledge. At every turn, in and through the heterogeneous company that comprises the center, greater and different kinds of curiosity are provoked and stoked. To change the world, know it from as wide and diverse perspectives as possible. In framing questions, think always of exigency and purpose. Why this? Why this here? Why this here now? Ruthie poses in What Is to Be Done, her ASA presidential address. To this, a lesson of CPCP is, what else do we need to ask to know? Lesson 3, stretch awareness, expand imaginaries, share stories. I borrow from Catherine McKittrick's discussion of citationality to sketch this third element of practice. In Dear Science, which not incidentally opens with a quotation from Ruthie, quote, there is no life that is not geographic, McKittrick writes, the sharing of ideas, no beginnings, no ends, enables a terrain of struggle through which different futures are imagined. Or as Ruthie puts it in What Is to Be Done, gather all the raw materials that comprise the textures, the documents out of which the present emerged, so that and was emergent and was secured, and use, and quote, use oppositional theorizing and thinking to analyze the material so that the outcome is not another litany of horror, but a regrounding of the terrain of the racial modalities of class struggle. People and planet continue to suffer. What do we need to know to make change, and what's in the way of our knowing? Who and what benefit from the narrow visions of possible futures and ignorance of other possibilities? How, with what tools, do we expand our awareness and stretch the imaginations? What stories do we tell, do we share? Collective study is, in this regard, a creation or replenishment of time, which is, as Ruthie has reminded us elsewhere, another name for life. See, time is good. This practice is accordingly in part about how curriculum matters, and that contestation over curriculum are matters of life and death. The practice of the CPCP is to read expansively, study thickly, and imagine collaboratively, organize, 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 and tell the stories that help to replenish the grounds of livingness. I'll close my remarks by rehearsing briefly the first time I met Ruthie, which was, I believe, sometime in the year we both arrived at the Grad Center in 2010. Various people in the building, including then President Bill Kelly and others who recognized her arrival as momentous, wanted to have a celebratory reception. I was volunteered to ask after Ruthie's interest in such an event and happily accepted as I really wanted to meet her. We lunched together at a Korean spot on 32nd Street, and I spoke about the building's desires to celebrate her. And Ruthie demurred in favor of something more substantive, something more useful. We derived a panel that would center around Golden Gulag. Nikhil Singh and Cindy Katz were ultimately the panelists, and there was pink champagne with which to toast. That was my thing. I was really into pink champagne. I like bubbles. Bubbles are celebratory. That move to take any and every opportunity as one to do work that matters is a characteristic practice of CPCP under Ruthie's leadership. Always, the lesson, the practice is use the resources available as meaningfully as possible for the sake of the project and not celebrity. In that way, build the scaffolding so that the work can continue uncontingent on the presence of a particular individual, however and especially if charismatic. I know many of you will recognize that all these qualities I've been describing are characteristic of abolition geography as Ruthie gives it to us. Quote, abolition geography is capacious. It isn't only by, for, or about Black people, and specific. It's a guide to action for both understanding and rethinking how we combine our labor with each other and the earth. Abolition geography takes feeling and agency to be constitutive of, no less than constrained by, structure. In other words, it's a way of studying and of doing political organizing and of being in the world and of worlding ourselves. These past 24 years of the CPCP have provided us with the tools and acts as the scaffolding to carry this practice and orientation, this mode of doing and being, into a present and future in which we continue the urgent task of creating shared meanings of place in ways that honor people and planet rather than profit and possession. I'm immensely grateful to continue to be shaped by and buoyed by it. Immensely grateful particularly to Ruthie, but to everyone in this room. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Candice. It was a fantastic overview of a lot of things that I would want to say. So now I don't have to say them, which is great. But I think it's worth commenting a little bit on how the centre got founded. It was founded by Neil Smith. And, you know, we often think that somebody has an idea and then puts it into reality. Whereas a good Marxist will say, how come there are practices which create the idea? And Neil had a series of practices which I think ended up with the idea of the centre. Part of the practices arose from the fact that Neil came and studied with me at Johns Hopkins University in an interdisciplinary program which was supposed to look at environmental issues, and this was 1960s and 70s. And it was a strange department of geography and environmental engineering in which there were only 2 human geographers. And Neil came to study human geography, and the result of that was that he ran out of courses to take. By the time he'd taken stuff with me and with one other person, that was it. So he had to go and raid all the other departments around Johns Hopkins. So he started to enjoy himself by enrolling in very distinguished professors' lectures and seminars and so on. And being the troublemaker that he was, he would always dispute entirely what they were saying. Particularly over the issue was he was taking Marx very seriously at the time, that they usually got Marx completely wrong, and in any case they hadn't read their Trotsky right. Now, the result of this was that at some point or other I received complaints from some of my colleagues who said to me, for God's sake, keep that guy out of my classes. And if you have any more people like that, under no circumstances should you let them take my classes. So I said, okay. But then there was another group that said, God, you got any more people like that? We have such a good time. But then there was suddenly this great realization, which we actually came to mutually one time when we were sitting down with a bunch of history students, because Neil was taking a seminar in history, and was arguing as always, you know, with them. And the students were saying, God, he was so lucky. Why was he lucky? Because, you know, he can go back to the department and the only person he has to sort of say he's working and doing and right things is you. And the rest of the time he can do what he likes and he can challenge. In history, if we go after our professor, we lose our grant, we lose everything, and suddenly we realized that there's a real problem in academia, and it's a serious problem, and I want to throw it out there, that the disciplines, you know, sort of Baudelaire, Foucault, are about punishment, not about emancipation and liberation. And actually what Neil was discovering was the joy of complete emancipation and being put in a situation where he could say all kinds of rude things to some famous professor and not find he'd lost his, you know, bursary and the like. So this was something which he thought was an ideal, if you like, of an alternative university. It was a university which was emancipatory in the sense that the disciplinary aspects were disappeared. And this comes out, I think, in some of the things that Candice was saying, that what was foundational in the idea was to try to create a space which was emancipated from disciplinary disciplines. And that was very much in his head. Now, when he was at Rutgers, he actually found a seminar going on which was interdisciplinary, which had some of those features. So when Bill Kelly, who was the provost at the time, went out to recruit Neil for being a strong admirer of some of his work, Neil basically said, "Look, I'll come, but I want to have a space where something this kind of thing can go on." And Bill Kelly said, "Okay, great, we'll try and create that and do that." And Bill certainly did that. Neil was helped by the fact that at the time the Ford Foundation was giving up on area studies but wanted to do something different, and Neil proposed to them they think about uneven geographical development as a substitute. And so they gave him $1 million for 5 years. So we had a great time. And he could invite all kinds of people. And the other thing was that Bill Kelly, for all this time that he was here, was always strongly in support, very strongly in support in bringing Ruthie here, and bringing other people here, Catherine Verdery and other people like that. But the other peculiar thing about Neil and I coming here was this, that the geographers didn't want us. It's very strange. Very strange. The geography department looked at Neil and said, "They don't want him." And when I came, they said, "No, we don't want you either." So we ended up in anthropology, which is all right with us. We didn't care, precisely because by that time, both of us had imbued the idea that the ideal university is one where it's emancipatory and you just pursue emancipatory knowledge for its own sake. And you'd also do it in a multidisciplinary way. And so the certain rules of selection of who participates in the seminar, and the core of what the centre does is, of course, lies in the seminar. And you're right, it's non-hierarchical, although there is a certain Leninist at the centre of it all, who, when things get out of order, you know it, and you know, we can, you know, there are limits, you know, to emancipation. You know, you soon find out. But this was actually the way in which Neil ran it, and it's the way in which I ran it. And when Ruthie came, she slotted into that role extremely well. And so the centre then had a certain kind of kudos in terms of the kinds of things that we were pursuing. It was politically very active. Neil all along had actually, even at Hopkins, he was walking around saying, "Academia sucks. You know, we've got to get the people on the campus, and we've got to get the people from." And so Neil was very active in terms of trying to relate the work of the centre to social movements in the city. I tried to do the same thing with Right to the City and all the rest of it. So we were constantly trying to do those things, and we were always given a great deal of help from the central administration, which I'm sure will surprise most of you, but Bill Kelly was absolutely very much in favour of what we were doing and went out of his way. And in CUNY, that was an incredible thing. I mean, just a small thing. If you want a space to do something in CUNY, you have to go to some people who control room reservations. And they've always got the idea that maybe Starbucks is going to come along and want to rent a space, and they want to keep everything. So it's impossible to get anything done through that until you kind of wanted to, you know, we brought in somebody like Naomi Klein or something like that, and we wanted the Prushansky Auditorium, but the room people wouldn't give it to us because they said, "No, you know, blah, blah, blah." So we go to Bill Kelly and say, hey, look, we've got Naomi Klein coming, and you know, we need the Prushansky. And say, okay, and you can pick up the phone and say, give him the Prushansky. And so we had all the things we might want in that kind of way. Since Bill Kelly has left, it's another story. Another story entirely. We've got incompetent administrators who don't even know how to, you know, oh, we have rooms. And I came up with some crazy thing. Actually, I had to face up to the fact that we had so many events sponsored by the centre that then when they did a kind of a shadow kind of thing on renting of spaces, we were actually costing the university a vast amount of money, and we should actually pay rent on the facilities of for holding. And after a while, we were told, you've got to cut your programming down by half. I said, I'm not going to do that under any circumstances, you know. But so things are not as good as they once were, in the sense of what we can do. But the core of what we do and how we do it is, I think, just absolutely astonishing. I mean, I'm amazed. I don't always come to the seminar these days. When I first came, I didn't go to the seminar because I felt it was kind of Neil's, you know, terrain, and you didn't want to muscle in on it. But that disappeared after a bit. And we were very happily working on the kinds of things that each year with its theme, and great insistence upon the participation in the seminar of not packing in too many people from one discipline. So we have multiple disciplines, and encourage people very much to be commentators upon a topic that they've never encountered before. This had been one of the big experiences I had in Baltimore, because I was with a lot of engineers, and I was going to seminars with titles like Three-Dimensional Flocculation in Sludge. And I kind of realized, I
think I've seen that movie.
Yeah, it's quite a good movie, actually. But the thing was that I, at some point or other, I got mad as hell after one of these things, and I went into the chair of the program, and I said, you know, I've had a whole seminar in which I'm talking about the hydrogen ion. And at that time, I was in my sort of romantic sphere of thinking about nature and all those kinds of things in a rather romantic way. And I said, are you expecting me to write an ode to the hydrogen ion? And the chair of the department looked at me, and a great smile came over his face, and he kindly says, God, that sounds like a good idea. So he suddenly realized that actually there are spaces and there are people inside the university who are actually able to encompass themselves that way. So that, and Neil, I think, founded that and learned a great deal about that in the early stages, and I think in some ways it then led to this formulation of a space. Now this creates a problem, because what we do is so special and so unique, and is so in a way intangible but very objective in terms of its consequences, that it's very difficult for you know, even decent sort of administrators, of which there are hardly any, but decent administrators, to really appreciate exactly what goes on. And every now and again in CUNY, there's this thing about they're going to rationalize everything, and so they decide they want to merge us with some other centers and create one big center, and we're all going to happily work together. And we kind of have to say, no, it doesn't work like that. Our seminar is very special. It's not only in its content, it's in its form, in its style and everything. And it has something very special in terms of the experience that comes out of it. And that it would be diluted it by putting it into some other center of some kind. But there's a constant battle, as it were, to keep these centers open. But I want to say this about academia in general. Academia in general has become a harder and harder place to have a decent life, I have to say, and I feel sorry for the younger generation. I had it very lucky in the 1960s and 1970s when there were all kinds of things that you could do. These days, it's still a real struggle, and I think keeping a centre like this open even though it is somewhat beleaguered these days, not for anything that we have done, but because of the way in which the university has started to set up cost centres and all kinds of things like that. So this creates a certain difficulty. But I think that the content of what we have to do, what we're doing, and how we do it is extremely important. And actually, one of the things that I think is the case, that from all of my knowledge of everything that's gone on in this centre over the last 24 years, I would say that it has marked everybody who's been through it in certain kinds of ways, in terms of the kinds of ways, the kinds of people they are, the kinds of academics they are. And I think that this is something we can be genuinely proud of. I think Ruthie's coming was a godsend. I was about, I'd had 7 years of kids. I thought, oh, and it was wonderful to have you come and give the dimension to it. So at the same time that we have this sort of openness and everything, we, I think, have our own little quirks of style which we inject, and so there's a certain kind of personality that comes with it, which is actually rather part of its charm and is part of its effectiveness. That it's an expressive place and an expressive space, and I'm very, very happy to have been part of it and to have it through Ruthie, and I really am hoping that Miriam will enjoy this very much, and enjoy the battling with the with the 8th floor and everything else, and that's going to go on. But nevertheless, a lot of the time, by the way, people kind of look at me and say, well, how can you possibly do any politics in a situation of this kind? And my answer is, it's not too hard. You've got to think of one word. What is it? Subversion. And it's fantastic, because most of the administrators are so stupid, they don't even know they're being subverted. And therefore, having a strategy of subversion, Miriam, take it well. Learn it well. It can be fun, actually, at least for the first 5 years, and after that, after that, you'll probably get tired and want to listen to something. So, anyway, that was my thing. We could talk further about it later on, but it's been a wonderful experience. And Ruthie, thank you very much for all you've done. Thank you.
I don't think my anecdotes will be as much fun as those. I've been associated with the CPCP at 2 different moments. First was around the initiation of the centre, the second year actually. And it was Bill Kelly who put Neil Smith onto me. I think he described me as an orphan of the English department. Because I had started off in the UK in economics, and then I moved into cultural studies. And the English department, when I joined I was at Baruch, I started teaching at the Graduate Centre, was a little bit on the sclerotic side. This isn't being recorded, is it? It was wonderful, it was wonderful. Anyway, so I got a phone call from Neil in 2001 in the summer, and he said, you do kind of like cultural studies, Marxist, anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-colonialist stuff. So, well, sure, yeah, I guess that covers some of it. But he said, how would you like to work for the CPCP? And I said, well, what would I have to do? And he said, just keep doing that stuff, keep doing that stuff. But there was actually some organizational things that I had to take care of, because actually Neil was on the ball most of the time. When I worked with David, there were certain aspects of the CPCP, like funding and day-to-day running of the centre, that was not at the front of your brain, let's say. But now let's have a serious moment, because I was 2 weeks into the job, and I was on the train coming into New York, and I got a phone call from a friend of mine in Granada who said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Well, I've had my coffee, you know, I'm on the train." And obviously he was referring to the first plane hitting the World Trade Center. So by the time I reached New York, the second plane had hit, and you know, everybody has memories of that day. But this was only the second week of, you know, my work for the CPCP, and everybody in New York, obviously, and a lot of people elsewhere were absolutely traumatized. And so I didn't see Neil that day, but he called me up, and his first question was, "Well, I suppose we shouldn't have the seminar tomorrow, right?" Well, I think that's a good decision. I think probably, given what's going on in Manhattan, this is not a good idea. But we talked about the annual theme, right? So we have a different theme for each year's seminar, and the theme for that year was crossing borders. Yeah, there was some crossing borders going on. But what we tried to do, though, was rather than say to people that, you know, what you think of crossing borders is now irrelevant given this historical moment, we would generate a conversation around the meaning of crossing borders that somehow took into account the catastrophe, the trauma, and the political, socio-political, and geopolitical implications of the attack and its aftermath. And the reason I mention this is not just because I was really too young to take this in, but the 7th of October was, of course, when the US began their war on Afghanistan. And the 7th of October has occurred again in this year of the CPCP. And I think one of the ways that I've managed to process this is through my experience of that the first time round. I mean, I think elements of that seminar that particular year didn't work, but for instance, we got folks from Doctors Without Borders who were working in Afghanistan to talk about the relief work, and there was, you know, like a medical catastrophe after, you know, in the first month, right, the US dropped more bombs than they dropped in the Second World War on Afghanistan, and, you know, big weapons, right, big weapons, like take the top off mountain weapons. Yeah, I mean, their presentation to the seminar was just, it was moving, but on the other hand, there was this feeling like, what can you do with this war machine? Once this war machine begins, it has its own internal logic. And what are we doing in our conversations that helps us to understand the nature of that logic? And that's really how we kind of restructured the seminar on the fly with an actually existing crisis. I think the current crisis is of a different order, but there are connections both with the extent of the violence, the militarism, and this feeling that individual states can make decisions over the desires or wishes of those states' peoples. And you know, in the last few weeks, obviously, with the student protests, that particular feeling has been intensified, I think, because it seems like you're only dealing with an institutional logic of the university, but that institutional logic is also being refracted and reflected and mediated by the state at large, right, by the United States, and what the United States wants in this particular conflagration. Yes, so at the end of that year, I think Neil and I mutually agreed that that this was too much. And I went back to doing union organizing at Baruch. And then rejoined around about the time that David took over the directorship. So these annual themes, consciousness and revolution, we loved that so much, we did it a second year. So it was easy to write the description for the second year because we just said, continued, ... The agrarian question, this gets back to not just a Leninist interest, right? But also relationships with MST, the discourses around land grabbing made more than a little sense. And what's so wonderful, and I think this is reflected in both what Candace and David have been saying, is that it draws in people from disciplines who don't expect to sit in the room having conversations with one another, right? And so, you know, I'm a bit of a lit theorist, so I say that with a whisper. But, you know, this guy, Mikhail Mikhailovich Bakhtin, developed this theory of dialogism, right? And one of the amazing things about dialogism, at least in his representation of it, is that you change what you say according to the context in which it's being said, and that you have these speech genres which you develop really in relationships with people who you cannot necessarily assume partake in your discourse. So there's this constant attempt at constant dynamism where your ideas and thinking are being shaped because of the specific relationship with other thinkers and speakers. And I think our little seminar, modest as it is, has become a sort of an object lesson in dialogicity at that level. And so every year, and I tell the fellows that every year that I've had the honor of being involved with the center, I've learned so much from listening to people and who share their research that is new to me, right? With something that I haven't thought about deeply and discussed before. So, I mean, on the plus side, I'm learning new things, but I suppose on the negative side, I keep relearning how ignorant I am, especially about the folks from the social sciences who we know and love deeply. I'm not going to go over all the kinds of events that we have, but I do think there have been special moments. I think the 30-year anniversary of Cedric Robinson's Black Marxism was an amazing and powerful event, which did honor not only to Cedric's work, but to all of the people who have been involved in thinking about the Black Marxism as a set of ideas and the Black radical tradition as something that had, before his extensive and deep research, had not been fully realized as not just an intellectual project, but as a political project. And that's why another reason that I've been so happy to work with Ruthie is because she embodies that kind of force of thinking where praxis is not simply a kind of where you tag on action to an intellectual idea, but it becomes sort of the living tissue of why you do what you do. I suppose I shouldn't use the word organic for the seminar, but I do think that it has a kind of an organic and creative reciprocity that enables somebody's work like Cedric's to take on new meaning with new readers. Finally, I think one of the years the seminar theme was how to fight back. And I do think this is important, not just for the contemporary crisis, but for intellectuals or academics who feel that their whatever they do is simply a professional vocation, right? That it's something with their very narrow parameters, and that as long as they stay within those lines, they can feel happy that somehow they're an expert in what they do, right? And I, at the center, we profoundly disagree with that. And I was thinking about this in terms of our dear President Biden's statement, I think yesterday, that dissent is essential to democracy, but should never lead to disorder. This idea of dissent is so far from what we do at the center, and I'm not sure. It's not simply that we need to rethink democracy, but we have to be able, as intellectual activists, to disseminate a notion of dissent that resonates differently from the notion that you can perform opposition as long as nothing changes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to share a little bit about my connections with the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics over the years. I was in the seats, as was documented, who knew, by Candace here, as a fellow twice. I've spoken at conferences, and I've remained in the center's orbit as a friend and supporter of the center. So I have different things to offer. The first thing I want to talk about a little bit is just the hierarchies that are evident at CUNY and what it means for faculty who work on the campuses to receive a fellowship from the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics, which gives us a course release, many of whom are teaching very high teaching loads. And the idea of having, this time off, this entire year off, and be supported by having a course release was really tremendous. I feel like that was like a practical consideration for me when I was accepted. It was like, yes, I have this time, and not only that, I have this time to be in a place where you could be an activist, where you could talk about things that felt like, they were on the left. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, I will say. I recognized really quickly that although I had talked a lot about interdisciplinarity and how fabulous it was and how I was moving in that direction in my academic life, I had never really been around or been the only historian or one or two in the room. And I realized really quickly all of the things that I didn't know in radically challenging ways. I would literally be writing down like words and Googling. And I read things that I'd heard about but never really like understood. And to think about different elements of theory was not something I was ever comfortable with. And so it was a challenge. It was like a growth experience for me to be part of the Center for Place and Culture and Politics. I was there for the theme, How to Fight. I really felt like I learned so much about political struggle. It was amazing to be in the room with Ruthie at the helm and Peter at the helm, and really feel like people were playing with ideas, that ideas were respected, that it was okay to be unsure or say you didn't know. And I think the spaces of vulnerability for people who are experts in whatever they're in, oftentimes we're not put in that position where we feel comfortable enough to say, what? What is that? Or to write that down and say, okay, I've got to figure that out so I could say more, do more, understand more. It was really an opening for me in a lot of ways to be part of the seminar, so much so that I came back a second time. I want to say that 40% of my Facebook friends come from my networks that I met in those seminars. I feel like we were all kind of just brought together in support of how difficult it was to actually write and to put together all of the different aspirations we had as scholar activists for what we wanted our work to do and mean in the world. It's one thing to say that, but to actually do that or feel like you're able to put that on the page was so, it was so, I think, revelatory to be in a seminar that was structured around readings one semester and then sharing our writings in the second semester. And by the second semester, we were now, I think, bonded such that we could be so generous with our writings, which felt like such little, infant offerings, and put it out there in front of these, great minds and receive such lovely feedback. So definitely being in the seminar was part of that. I want to talk about the postdocs and the visiting fellows that were part of it. Again, I'd imagined that I was internationalizing my work, and I was going now to international conferences and et cetera. But to be with scholars from Turkey, Brazil, Denmark, to be with people who were doing their academic work in languages outside of English, and to sort of be in that environment where you could realize that you're really sitting, it just really makes you think about yourself, your world, your place in the world, to be part of this community of people who are doing and producing intellectual work in places that you have not realized that you don't expect intellectual work to come from that's relevant to you. And I think that is what I got out of being in that seminar with all of the amazing postdocs and the people who were writing about places that I knew very little about, writing about struggles that I just heard of or they seemed historic to me, Eastern Europe, and to think about the everyday and the ways in which they were bringing those movements and those politics to the present was also one thing that I learned or I took away from the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics. Being in the room with filmmakers, anthropologists, sociologists, people who were engaged in different levels of academic work at different registers, using archives that I was not accustomed to or even aware of, was also very opening. I think that being part of it under the stewardship of Ruthie was an amazing experience every time that I did it. I think that I saw Ruthie in so many different roles, in particular as a mentor. I want to say that any dissertation committee she invited me to be on, I said yes. And I got a chance to really see the brilliance of so many students who were in the Graduate Center, who were in her orbit. I got a chance to read so many things that I would have never read. And I got to also understand Ruthie as kind of an embodiment of a kind of integrity, a generosity. The way that she encouraged people's voices was so, so important to me to kind of see. She's a fearless analyst, just a free-ranging thinker, someone who delights in ideas. In this anti-intellectual world, to be with someone who's literally delighting in ideas. Let's talk about this. I felt like there was nothing that was like, you could throw out anything and Ruthie would make it into like some amazing intervention or question, or let's think about this. And just to be with someone who was just such an amazing thinker, I think was very, very important to me. I think it's important to note that, as a Black woman, oftentimes Black women are not allowed to occupy that type of space as leaders. I think Ruthie, as someone who was in a position of power, who was respected as an intellectual, who kind of stood in her own height, who didn't suffer fools. It was just important to be around somebody like that. For me, someone who's more reserved, kind of person, and then to sort of see fearless Ruthie just diving in. So I want to share some memories that I have that I just kind of listed, sort of my big takeaways. I remember one time in seminar where someone said something, and sometimes our offerings were not, you know, all that special. Someone offered something out.
Okay, turn the recording off now.
And Ruthie kind of dismantled, she redirected, and I just learned that criticism could be kind, which is something that we don't get. Oftentimes we're ripping things to shreds, or we're, you know, in an attack mode around, you know, something that we hear that we think is problematic. But Ruthie was kind. She showed me that criticism could build. It could build someone up. It could build on an idea and remix it in ways that were indeed provocative and good. I remember the time that I saw Ruthie out of the Center for Place, Culture, Politics, and there she was at Occupy. Right? I remember the seeing her there on the People's Mic, just embodying outside of the classroom space what education meant, what it meant to be active, to be visionary. That was so powerful to me. The people that I met in sort of the network and community of the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics have really meant a lot to me. I see several of you in this room. You know, I feel like you may not know Ruthie, but we're still connected. we celebrating each other's books when we saw that, oh my gosh, the little baby is now, it's a book. You know, we see how our work has grown and how we have continued our commitments, that we nurtured and we opened, because oftentimes you're terrified sometimes to open up your commitments in certain spaces because you're punished for those things, but we trusted each other enough to do that. So being part of that network and community was really, really, really important. I felt like Ruthie planted seeds as a leader in the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics, and we are the seeds, those of us who went through there, the work that our work is doing in the world, the work that we're doing as activists, whether it be in education, whether it be, you know, in whatever ways that we're doing that work. I think that's so, so important. And I think that one of my biggest takeaways from the center, or my time at the center, is about movement building. And I think at this time where a movement is here to end the genocide in Palestine, is building upon the work of long-distance runners and long-standing, you know, voices who have been marginalized, who have been repressed, who have faced, you know, so much more that didn't make it to the news, you know, in these last couple of weeks. I think that some of my lessons from Ruthie are about organizing, about practicing hope, about radical listening, about global linkages, and most of all about our imagination, some of the frameworks that she has given us to help us understand and what we're seeing around us, whether it be organized abandonment or the concept of freedom is a place that Candace so beautifully read from earlier. It's just, those are the things that sort of stay with me in my heart based on my time at the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics. So I want to thank you, Ruthie. Thank you for everything. I came back a second time, stronger, more interdisciplinary, more global. It's still, it's still, you know, it's an ongoing journey, I would say. And I think you've just been a beacon for so many people, so approachable, always giving the best and the warmest hugs. If you've ever gotten a hug from Ruthie, you know that they're just life-affirming. So we love you. Thank you for all you've done for the center and for all of us.
It's 6:45. I don't know what time we had till.
I think 6:40. We've got 5 minutes. So, any questions?
We can put the comments in the room.
Yeah, and keep in mind that Ruthie can't kick us from that far away under the table. David, you have been
legs
warned.
are long. I would say.
do you want to be a fellow at the Center for Place, Culture and Politics? We'll leave some Venmo numbers and cell numbers, and we'll see what we can do. Yes?
How did you come up with the name of the center?
Oh, that's a good question. Did Neil ever tell you?
Yeah, he did, but I've forgotten now.
I think he actually said CCCP, and and it came out wrong. You know, it came out wrong. You know, sometimes we've shortened it to PCP, and then people say, "Really?" You know. So now we always say CPCP. But he never explained. He never explained to me where the. I mean, obviously, the elements of the name are extremely important, and not just to the Marxist geographers, right? So there's a logic behind it, but he never explained it to me.
I was glad, by the way, Robin, that you mentioned the international connection, the people we've had from Europe and from Latin America and so on. It's been a fantastic thing. So thank you for bringing that up. We have quite a lot of following, actually, it turns out, in Central Europe and France and elsewhere. So yeah.
And we have a very steady stream of comrades from Brazil, many of whom are in the room right now.
Yep. And we're hoping to do, you know, like site visits where we get to share our research in Brazil, perhaps.
Yeah, and I want to say that people oftentimes contact me about like how to come to the U.S. and do their work, because it's very hard to do so, to get the visas, to get the funding, to get the frameworks, and I always point to the center. So I think it just has so much meaning, especially at a time of, you know, border control and repression.
It's true. We usually get more postdoc. I mean, not the official postdoc that's rooted in the center, but people who have postdoc money who want to be affiliated with the center for a year. And we simply don't have enough spaces, physical space, to accommodate everyone. So if the administrators are watching, more space.
Do we have any more questions?
Or testimonies.
No? Okay, then we'll move on to the next panel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was great.
That was great. It took us back.
I wasn't sure the canvases were off.
Yes, I like that. It worked. I think it worked. Somebody had to do it.
Yes, somebody had to do it. Yeah.
I'm glad you did. Yeah. And the prehistory from David, it was great. I think it
Did her homework.
And every feeling has like talking about, and I was just like sitting there, like she's talking, like you know, talking about my chat, and I'm like, this is such a good thing, thank you so much. Yeah, I just, yeah, that was so.
Harder to get you to the CBC. So you haven't resigned, so you just leave that. So you can kick the tires. That makes sense. I didn't want to say that, but I know it's right.
Yeah, I know. So can we just...
I met you before. I go to John Jay. Here, sit here, Mariam. Yeah. What's your name? Mariam. What? See you again. Yeah. Sorry? What? There you are.
Folks, we're going to start to convene again because of the unfortunate fact that we have to be out of the building at 8:30.
Published political statement of harm. They acknowledged everything. They said they're going to change things. They agreed to all our demands, and they have published several statements so far already.
Excellent.
So
I was going to talk to you about the coming NWSA.
Because now we do want to participate. And we also got Kashmiri.
Yes, definitely.
Hello, everyone. We're starting.
Am I going first?
No, you're going first, and then feel free to. Yeah.
Should I? Or like, what should I say? Nam? I'm going to get up, right? But
So you're going to get up and Ruthie's going to take your place.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, because it's going to be streamed. So it's not that she is the main person who's sitting there. She's an authority.
Okay. شو رأيك لكن تضع ديتين الميل and then you get Ruthie to sit here?
No, yes.
Or, hold on, someone's sitting here, right? Yeah, I know. بس أنا يعني أقعد كده.
Ruthie, can you sit here because my hearing.
Once I'm done speaking, I'm gonna get.
Anyway, besides you're the center of attention.
Okay, that's fine. I'm speaking now. Okay.
Good evening, everybody. We're about to start, so kindly invite you to come. Ruthie's piece on Lenin, hanging out with me. Things to think through. Those are trying times. As David had mentioned earlier, it's pretty challenging. Those are hard times for brown bodies, for Arabs, for Palestinians. They are also especially trying times for CUNY students, especially after the past week. And I'm sure as many of you are aware of what happened at City College. So as a premise to our following panel, I'd like to introduce Mariam, who will be sharing a statement from the CUNY Gaza Solidarity Encampment and CUNY for Palestine.
Hi, everyone. I would like to begin by emphasizing that the purpose of my speech today, my purpose as an organizer, and most importantly, my purpose as a human being, is to stand up for Gaza and the Palestinian people from the belly of the beast. May every word I speak tonight strengthen the movement for Palestinian liberation and aid in the liberation of all oppressed people. The direct translation of the word intifada is to shake off. And in its common usage, it is understood to mean social uprising. Social uprising against oppression, against occupation, against settler colonialism, imperialism, racism, and most importantly, all forms of injustice. Social uprising has been historically used to fight injustice, not just in Palestine, but across the globe, from anti-war movements in the imperialist core to the anti-colonial struggles of Algeria and South Africa, from Stop Cop City to the Puerto Rican independence movement, and in all the anti-racist, anti-capitalist, and anti-colonialist struggles. While we all know the quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere" by Martin Luther King Jr., it is abundantly clear that Palestine is viewed as the exception, as institutions continue to attempt to shut us down. I guess they haven't understood that when we say, the more you try to silence us, the louder we will be, we truly mean it. The student uprisings underway across this country have been named the Student Intifada, emphasizing that the power indeed lies with the students. Students have always been at the forefront of organizing, going back to the fight against McCarthyism in the 1950s, to the Black Power and student deoccupation movements of the 60s, the anti-racist and intersectional movements in the 90s, the anti-war movements of the early 2000s. Palestinian solidarity organizing has been growing stronger throughout our campuses over the past decade and a half. Since October 7th, student organizing against the Zionist imperialist genocide has accelerated, culminating in Gaza solidarity encampments in multiple universities. Despite witnessing the repression against these encampments, CUNY students courageously decided to launch their own encampment last week, on April 25th. On Tuesday, April 30th, 6 days after it was established, the CUNY Gaza Solidarity Encampment was raided and dismantled by the NYPD after City College President Vincent Bordeaux declared a state of emergency. The president failed to consult with the student body presidents before making this decision, in violation of CUNY Manual of General Policy 7.071. This decision by the president to invite the NYPD, including the notoriously violent Special Response Group, the SRG, which is dedicated to policing protests and counterterrorism. This allowed them to enter the campus and brutalize students, alumni, faculty, and staff, as well as members of the broader CUNY community. 157 people were arrested, with several held for over 36 hours in violation of the court ruling, which requires detainees to be arraigned within 24 hours of arrest. Some of those arrested are facing trumped-up felony charges of burglary, based on the lie that CUNY community members entering into a CUNY administrative building constitutes a break-in. Many students and faculty also face the possibility of further retaliation from the administration. Recent statements by the Chancellor Meadows and Mayor Eric Adams are a reminder of the broader political context in which this is unfolding. A resurgent McCarthyism that is targeting the student movement in particular for its principled political opposition to the genocide and successful organizing in solidarity with Palestinian resistance and liberation. This position is rooted in a rich tradition of anti-war activism and radical campus organizing in solidarity with all oppressed peoples. Heavy on the all. The violent raids we have seen across New York in recent days, including at Columbia, the New School, NYU, SUNY Purchase, as well across the country, show us that our administrations and our government officials are more concerned with protecting capitalist imperialist interests than the safety and well-being of our students and workers. These administrations are therefore illegitimate. Heavy on the illegitimate. Anyone concerned about the rise of fascism in this country must speak out and take a stand in solidarity with the encampments. If administration had truly cared about their students and protecting free speech on campus, they would not have invited the brutal militarized police assault in the first place and would certainly not be invested in extending the punitive consequences beyond the brutality and trauma already inflicted on people. The CUNY Gaza Solidarity Encampment was inspired by the student-led movement of the 1960s, specifically the 1969 CUNY student protest movement, when more than 200 Black and Puerto Rican students deoccupied campus buildings at CCNY and shut down the campus for 17 days. Hundreds of CUNY students and workers established an encampment at City College of New York Harlem's campus on the morning of April 25th. The students announced via press statement that we would remain encamped until the CUNY administration met their demands. These 5 demands include divestment, boycott, demilitarization of the campus, and solidarity with Palestinian liberations. We have linked these demands to a vision of a tuition-free, open admissions people's CUNY. In addition to this, we have demanded an end to the retaliation against CUNY students and workers speaking out against the Zionist entities' genocide of the Palestinian people. The encampment was a peaceful, liberating zone. CUNY community members from all generations, including students and elders and many children, came together in the encampment to collectively plan for a world free of oppression. Encampment activities include daily people's assemblies, live music, art builds, poetry readings, children's craft workshops, and political education on topics ranging from the history of the Puerto Rican and Black liberation struggles to the Filipino people's movements against the fascist state repression, U.S. imperialism, the history of the Palestinian liberation movement, and more. The students established a food pantry open to all Harlem community members after the institution shut down the current food pantry because they blamed it on us. We also established a medical tent, a People's Name Library named after Rafat al-Arir, the prominent Palestinian professor and writer who was martyred by Zionist forces in Gaza last December. The ultimate aim of the encampment was to press the administration to adopt the 5 demands. Along the way, we created a beautiful community based on collective care, solidarity, and we shared anti-colonial, anti-racist, anti-imperialist principles. This was a testament to the revolutionary power of the people, because the power does lie with the people. Where we see working class power and solidarity, however, CUNY and CCNY administration only saw threats, and that is because they do not represent the real CUNY community from which the encampment originally emerged. The Palestinian Liberation Student Movement is a civil rising, an intifada, and most importantly, it is a threat to all capitalist interests and fascist powers. The student encampments, sorry guys, the student encampments around the world are revolutionary, and mark my words, they will be immortalized in history books from years to come. Similar to the motivations driving the 1969 deoccupation, these students took actions that they knew could result in serious legal consequences because they believed strongly in their aim for fighting for justice for the Palestinian people and for all people facing oppression due to U.S. imperialism, settler colonialism, capitalism, and white supremacy. While the encampment was being violently dismantled by the fascist NYPD, the people refused to abandon the camp. This decision, inspired by the incredible steadfastness of the Palestinian people, who faced far greater violence than we did in that moment, and yet who have, for over 75 years, refused to concede anything to that violence and to its agent. The NYPD's arrests were violent, with several injuries ignored, and included incidents in jail where a Muslim woman's hijab was taken off, a recently common abuse we have seen from law enforcement across the nation. This treatment is reflective of the broader inhumanity of our racist and carceral system, designed to repress all that is beautiful and liberatory and in service of the interests of the ruling class. Their very brutality is a testament to the collective power of our people, from Turtle Island to Palestine. It's not for nothing that we defiantly shout NYPD, KKK, IOF, they're all the same, in the faces of these fascist pigs. We declare enough is enough. We will not sit by idly as the forces of fascism invade our campuses and turn them into something unrecognizable to the majority of CUNY community members, the CUNY community members who are committed to principles of justice and equality. We demand our university lives up to its claim to be the people's university. A people's university must stand in solidarity with all oppressed people, from the working class communities within which it is embedded, to the Palestinians resisting the ongoing imperialist Zionist genocide. We proudly stand in solidarity with the members of our community who organized and participated in the Gaza Solidarity Encampment. And to all the brave CUNY students and all students who are approaching finals, seasons, graduation, and the semester, we just want to make sure we all know this is not over. This summer brings a wonderful opportunity for us to continue the struggle for the 5 demands. While encampments can be sweat, resolves cannot be broken, we will come back again and again until the demands are met. CUNY must meet our 5 demands. All these universities must meet our demands. We will disclose, we will divest, we will not stop, we will not rest. Thank you. And to read our 5 yes, to read our 5 demands, you can go on the CUNY Gaza Solidarity Encampment Instagram. We actually just released a statement today, which we would love for you all to sign on. Maybe I could share and it could be shared. While these statements, you may swipe past them, but we need as many signatures as we can get right now. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for that. So you've already heard too much from me, so I'm just briefly going to introduce our distinguished speakers. Rabab Abdelhadi is Professor of Ethnic Studies, Race and Resistance Studies, and the founding director of Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diaspora Studies at San Francisco State University. She's also the founding director of the Center for Arab American Studies at the University of Michigan at Dearborn, which was a previous position. Abdelhadi is a long-standing advocate and activist for Palestinian rights, as you know, and is always welcome at the CPCP. She has published widely on Palestinian resistance and particularly on questions of gender and sexuality. Her essay, Framing Resistance, Call and Response, reading Assata Shakur's Black Revolutionary Radicalism in Palestine, appeared in Women's Studies Quarterly, and it's an essay and a journal I highly recommend. Mahaban. Ruth Wilson Gilmore, aka Ruthie, aka Subthug R, she can explain that, is a professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the CUNY Graduate Center, a friend and colleague for over a decade now, and I'm so honored that I'm able to introduce and even sit with her here. And we work together at the center, so I'll be brief here. Again, because Ruthie's soon to step down as the director, we're celebrating her immense contributions, obviously, to activism and radical thinking via this conference. Her work as an abolitionist is massively influential and obviously is in evidence in the recent book, Abolition Geography. And her critiques of the carceral state and racial capitalism represent, to me and many others, not just groundbreaking research, but a radical activist horizon of freedom and hope. Among her many awards is the Freedom Scholar Award of 2022. Freedom is not just a place, it's an award. Let me just mention, though, Ruthie and I also share, an interest in Lenin. Not long ago, Ruthie published an introduction to a Lenin collection, Imperialism and the National Question, and if Lenin were alive and not a cadaver in Red Square, he could learn a lot from Ruthie's argument. I think a lot of us have learned in the best sense from Ruthie Gilmore. Comrades.
Thank you. I'm going to read some of this stuff in order for me to save time and then get into the conversation. So first, I begin by acknowledging that in addition to convening on the land of the uprooted and displaced Lenape people and over mass graves of kidnapped and enslaved people and the many people who have violently been treated here in New York City and around the country, I want to acknowledge that my own university campus, San Francisco State University, sits on the stolen, unceded indigenous land of Ramaytush Ohlone people who continue to live and experience continued acts of displacement. The students and faculty at our university benefit from the occupation of the land, and we have a responsibility to bring this experience into our discussions on imperialism and occupation and a commitment to defeat the settler colonial project in the US. I make this acknowledgement as an indigenous Palestinian, Arab, Muslim woman of color, feminist and activist, whose land is colonized by Israeli settler colonialism, and where it is essential for anyone who comes to visit or live to express solidarity and as comrades in arms on the indigenous land of Palestine, all of Palestine, to not only acknowledge whose land it is, but no matter how short or long they stay, and no matter how good or noble their intentions are, their presence must be validated by the indigenous people of the land if they do not wish to be defined as settlers. This is not an empty acknowledgement or a cliche. It's really a call to arms, to dismantle settler colonialism, racism, capitalism, and the fascist state everywhere. I also want to take this moment to honor the fallen, who have fallen in Gaza, in the streets of the United States, South Africa, Lebanon, Puerto Rico, Vietnam, Cuba, Kashmir, Congo, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Philippines, and anywhere and everywhere around the world for our people's struggle, the martyrs who continue fall day in and day out. We honor and we remember them, and we don't have the time, or we will forget some names, so I will just invite each one of us to think of those who have passed and honor them in a moment of silence. Thank you. I want to express my appreciation to the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics that included me in honoring Ruthie Gilmore. I have a lot to say more about the center, but I really want to express also my gratitude to the People's Forum that's hosting us today, that has been co-leading the movement for liberation in Palestine and enacting what providing a space and place for intellectual, pedagogical, and organizing really means. We also are very grateful to the People's Forum because when our Facebook page was shut down for over a year, losing all the archives and the syllabi and the material, after we tried to have another classroom, open classroom, with several luminaries, including Layla Khaled, we were shut down. People's Forum gave us a refuge, a temporary refuge, to hold all our events for a whole year until we were able to actually struggle and get our Facebook page back. They really acted like host countries who give refuge to refugees until they can return to their homes. So we think of it also in the politics of return. This conversation here that I was so honored to be invited to speak about, to talk with Ruthie, to honor her, celebrate your impactful work that I think a new stage is beginning, right? Could not be more appropriate, more urgent, and more relevant. And my proposal to Mary and Peter and the organizing committee, I suggested to focus on three things. One is some of my most memorable interactions with Ruthie for over 35 years. That transformed, I'm not going to go over every single detail. I will mention some of them. They transformed our relationship from academic or activist colleagues to comrades in arms, when we haven't even seen each other for years and years. And sometimes we don't see eye to eye, as happened in the seminar, which is okay. I would like to focus on the matter of the abolition and as activism, resistance, and revolution in Ruthie's work and the work of the center, and how it connects to the current moment in Palestine. So let me start with some of the memories. First time I met Ruthie Gilmore was in 1990. Ruthie, by the way, people think that we only started delegations to Palestine. No. Like everybody thinks Black Palestinian Solidarity started after Trayvon Martin in 2012. It's really nice to have perspective on history. So Ruthie was actually member of the first women's delegation to Palestine that we organized as the Union of Palestinian Women's Associations in North America. We had asked our comrade, who was actually very much involved with us, the late Barbara Harlow, may she rest in power, and she was always organizing with us, publishing, translating Ghassan Kanafani, putting things in our newsletter and so on, that we wanted to organize a delegation. And of course, Ruthie, top of the list. And there were several of you. And I met Ruthie because I was briefing people at the airport before they left and debriefing them after they returned, for a particular reasons that we're not going to mention today, given the rising environment of repression. And I would like to ask you a little bit about speaking about that. Like, next time, I think we came together, it was after 9/11/2001. There was a conference at Mills College, organized by the National Center for Research on Women. And we were on the same panel speaking about security. And we were wondering, why are we invited to speak about security? I mean, we have very big problems with this whole thing that was going on with the securitized industries, with the arrests, with the profiling, and so on. And actually, we also walked out when Feminist Majority was invited to speak. And Eleanor Smeal got up and said, we were very proud of what we did in Afghanistan. So many of us, majority of the room, walked out. And it was a actually very, very interesting discussion. And I don't think a lot of people got it in the audience. Some people did, some people didn't. Then 2005 comes in, and a colleague of mine and I, we were organizing 50 years of Bandung, We call it the Spirit of Bandung. Adnan Hussein from NYU, and he's now at Queen's University. And we invited Barbara and Ruthie. You couldn't make it because we were going to Amman. We were organizing something in Amman and so on. And we were trying to do a special issue of the social text. It didn't work out. That's another part of the history that you will read about whenever I'll be able to write that book. But I think one of the most important really elements, not that the others are not, was Ruthie's support as the president of the American Studies Association for Palestine. There was a lot of movement in ASA, but this was the first time in the history of the American Studies Association that ASA, in material terms, not only in language, sponsored and paid to have a panel on Palestine, on Arab revolutions in 2011. Ruthie approved it, approved the budget. If you go to San Francisco State website now, they actually said they've received a grant from American Studies Association. They don't say how it happened, what's going on, what was the purpose. American Studies Association just decided to make a donation to San Francisco. But it was also at the same time when you gave your amazing speech about your narrative and about your history. And I remember you putting up images and speaking about your family. And it was really beautiful because you were bringing in your own personal experience with the collective struggle of a people in your and in past generations. It was really amazing. And by the way, I didn't really know that you went to Yale, because it's also one of the things that I'm in denial of. So it was like, whoa, you know. And also, this was also about whether we actually should get PhDs or not. I mean, this was the whole question. Do we want to go and get education or not, or we get the education? I also remember the panels that you organized on the 30th anniversary of Stuart Hall's managing the crisis, policing the crisis, right? And when you were saying that you were accosting him from one place to the other, and Paul why Paul Guerrero? Okay, slip off the tongue. Okay, he was one of the students, but Stuart Hall was a very, very big advocate for Palestinian rights way before anybody else did, and actually was very distinguished in the British critical cultural studies for being that, and always spoke up, and didn't always get the acknowledgement that he needed. But I want to I want to also speak a little bit more about the ASA, because it was so hard for us to be able to speak about something. Everybody was talking about Arab revolutions as Arab Spring, which is not a term we chose. Everybody was kind of saying that it came out of nothing. It's not really a result of cumulative struggle and so on. So, you know, I approached Ruth and I think John Stevens also, he was the executive director. But Ruthie, I said, Ruthie, we would like to do this. What do you think? And yes, we were enabled to actually have a whole panel. This was really historic. And we chose. Nobody else chose who would speak and so on. Nobody assigned who of the Palestinians are allowed to speak on behalf of the Palestinians. You know the story, it's happening today too. And it really had a lot of impact on the scholars who participated and on the whole ASA. This was 2011, by the way, just for people to keep in history. And then I invited you to speak at a panel I organized at CASAR, at the Center for American Research and Studies at the American University in Beirut in 2012, when Alex Lubin was the director. The center is pretty much over now. Yeah. And so we went and we had this, but also one of the things aside from the conference itself are the tours that were, or detour, as our colleagues, comrades in Hawaii say, detour, because they don't want to talk about tourism, solidarity or otherwise. And we went to Khiam, we visited the prison, very relevant, where Palestinians and Lebanese were held in the south of Lebanon by the South Lebanese Army and the Israeli occupation, which has been bombed many times before. We actually visited Mlita, which was a place where resistance had tunnels, set up tunnels. And for many times, for many, many years, and I'm only mentioning it now, we don't want to theorize about it, don't want to speak about it, because we couldn't talk about the tunnels then, and we can't talk about the tunnels now without actually endangering ourselves and our communities. We could speak about Ho Chi Minh tunnels in Vietnam. We could speak about other tunnels because this was a long time ago. It's supposed to be ancient history. So it's okay to talk about things that have passed, but it's not okay to talk about things that are going on. So this is part of the historical, the way how we deal with it. I couldn't attend that 2013 when they passed the BDS, so I have no idea what's going on. We were really targeted by the Zionists. It was emerged. And I wanted to say that despite all the new McCarthyist attacks, to which myself, my students, my colleagues, our own program were subjected, Ruthie has always been very supportive, signing many of the statements over the years, making space. Whenever I say I want to come, sit down in your office and talk about shoot the breeze and more than the breeze, and talk about what we needed to do and what was going on. And this is something that unfortunately is continuing today. Yesterday, we just finished one big session of the arbitration because the university president vetoed a decision by faculty to support our rights unanimously. So we're still moving into that. But I want to also say finally is the memory that brought us together, which is the fellowship that Ruthie offered me in 2016-2017 at the Center on Consciousness and Revolution. It was so valuable, and for me it was very touching on many levels. My own university had refused to allow me to take 6 very important fellowships. While I was teaching a full load online, so I wasn't going to even violate that, they said that they would not even reimburse me for public transportation tickets, food, or reproducing material to come to CUNY Graduate Center to attend, to participate in that. They said that this will benefit CUNY, it will not benefit our university. Ridiculous argument, you know. But they weren't going to do it. And they claim if they did recognize my fellowship, it was SOA, South Africa, Turkey, France, AUB, and CUNY. They said that will look like they are rewarding me in the face of Zionist groups, and they will be biased. So I could not do all these fellowships. I could only do 1 week of a month in France, and I had to pay for my expenses at the center. It was worth every penny. It was such an amazing intellectual space, and I know some of you spoke about that, where one of the things for me, I did not have to deal with the Zionist attacks. I could enter that space and really, really get transformed in a different place where all the conversations, you just like, you know, when it ends, it's like, oh my God, we're back to earth. It was amazing, the conversations, the discussions, the books. I remember we had a very big discussion about fascism. We had discussions about almost every single place in the face of the earth. We talked about all of this stuff, and there was so much support, and there was so much love, and there was so much intellectual production that are going on. And I see many faces in the room that I've met and became comrades and continue to become comrades. But really, for me, honestly, it saved my sanity. This was really saving my sanity because it was so horrible. The doxing, the attacks, the threats, the diminishing of the program, the isolation, the new McCarthyism, this space, and you know, I can talk about it forever and ever, and I know everybody else will do that. Ruthie also, this is finally in terms of the memories, gave us space to bring different Palestinian groups together for the whole year. I had been an organizer in New York. I moved away a lot. I came back. There were a lot of issues within the Palestine Solidarity Movement, the Palestinian movement. And I felt it would be really great to do that. We talked to some people, and we could use the center every week for our own meetings for a whole year. Not everything we tried to do succeeded, obviously, for other reasons. But also this was the place where I was able to develop the project that we're continuing to participate in and where some people here ended up participating in, Teaching Palestine Pedagogical Praxis and the Indivisibility of Justice. I am so indebted to Ruthie for all of these things, aside from all your intellectual impact on the world, for all of the stuff that you have done, and you've done so much more. I want to now move to, I don't know, if we want to stop, maybe you want to reflect on these, and then, yeah.
Yeah.
So I can take a break.
Yeah. I will reflect. I'll try to be brief, but I'm not good at being brief. But thank you, Comrade Rabab. Thank you. And all of the comrades who have spoken thus far, everybody who is in the room, those who will speak tomorrow, and those who have carried the energy of abolition, which is emancipation in rehearsal, through the center, not to the center or from it, but through it. And we've built, developed, increased it in the center. And I'm very happy about that. I want to say just a few words about some of Rabab's memories. I will never forget the first time we met. It was so that I could have a conversation with Rabab to debrief my detour to the West Bank and Gaza. We stayed, this was March 1990, we stayed in East Jerusalem, which in 1990 was entirely different to what it is today, at the Holy Land Hotel, of course. I still have a bar of soap from the Holy Land Hotel. And if I'm ever feeling particularly soiled by sin, I will use the soap. And I recall so intently meeting you. We were going to go for coffee here in Manhattan somewhere. I lived in Southern California at the time, and getting from Southern California to the West Bank and back took many, many airplanes, many airplanes. I flew in airplanes of airlines that no longer exist. TWA, the worst airline. The worst, but that's how I traveled. So I got back to New York, got in touch with Rabab. There was no email then, at least I didn't have it. So we used telephones, I think.
Yes.
You know, very old fashioned.
I think it was the landline too.
It was a landline. There was no mobile phones. Are you listening, young people? We made an international movement without the internet. And we met over near the UN on the street and started talking, and we were going to go have coffee. We stood on the sidewalk and talked for hours. We just couldn't stop talking. We never made it to the cafe, as I recall. We just talked and talked and talked. And that encounter, meeting you, becoming comrades with you, was part of my ongoing, perpetual transformation. Like, I'm not like this finished thing that then dispenses wisdom, or facts. A couple of other things I'd like to mention or reflect on. One is the meeting that we had in Beirut in 2012 at the Center for American Studies and Research, which was a completely different thing. It still exists, but it's altogether not what it was. And as Comrade Rabab was sharing, we did detours around Beirut to many places, including two resting places of martyrs. Yeah. One in it always catches in my throat.
The martyrs.
That's the second one. It was the one was in Sabra and Shatila, and we stood there and felt and thought. But the other was at the ancient cemetery, and we put ourselves in taxis to go from wherever we were to the cemetery of the martyrs, and. Craig and I were with another comrade, and not one of us spoke a word of Arabic. We were in a taxi, and the driver thought he knew where we wanted to go because Rabab or somebody else had instructed him where we wanted to go. But we were driving and driving and driving, and finally we had to stop because the cemetery there is like really vast. I mean, vast, vast, vast. And we'd stop and talk to people, and a couple of us had some okay French, so we could say in French what we were looking for, and eventually one of the stewards of the cemetery said, "Oh, the martyrs," and he sent us to where like these crusaders were buried. Wrong martyrs. And eventually, we finally found the rest of our comrades at the proper place where so many people whose actions and words continue to shape the struggle are at rest, but not restfully at rest, I don't think.
Like Hassan Kanafani.
Yes, like Hassan Kanafani. And I want to say one other thing, and that is in acknowledgement of our comrade who spoke on behalf of the encampments and the students and that movement. First of all, thank you so much for your words. There's a meme going around in the internet now. Now there is the internet. That says, oh, universities today are all about community engagement until the moment the community engages. And the two practices we recognize that are happening, especially in university and college campuses throughout the United States today, is that the students who are brilliantly and bravely pushing Intifada in the direction it must go in the context of universities and colleges, those students are being criminalized and infantilized at the same time. Criminalized, we heard about it, but also infantilized, told, you don't understand, it's too complicated for you. As though, as our comrade already told us, so much revolutionary thought and action hadn't emerged in the work and the thinking and the energy of young people. Young people make revolutions, and we old people, elders, come along. So those are the things I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Yes. And I actually remembered when we were in Shatila, we visited the mother of Sana.
Yes.
And and just remembered now, and she had been from the people who were displaced in 48. Mm-hmm. And we started asking her questions, our asking her in Arabic and translating to the comrades. And by the way, it was a very select group. Not everybody. I wasn't going to take everybody to meet Palestinians. People know I'm Orthodox that way. Okay. But and she spoke to us how it was before the Palestinian movement came to the camps and after. She said, and then one time she said, when the revolution came, we started having electricity. of course, there is still no electricity or regular in the refugee camps in Lebanon because the municipality is prohibited. But even spreading one line from the other and so on, they were protected by the militants from the movement who were there in prison. And then when the movement was expelled in 1982, and the fighters had to get on the ships and leave, people felt orphaned, and they were orphaned. And this is how Sabra and Shatila massacre took place. But I wanted to, I mean, you started talking about the current, what's going on today. So, I think there is a qualitative shift in the discourse, in the tactics, in the strategies from movements in the past and movements today. But I also don't want to throw everything that people have accomplished. The young comrade was speaking 69 and City College. My reference is 68 and San Francisco State. And I'm always really upset when people only mention Columbia, although now Columbia is God. But at that time, everybody talks about Columbia and free speech at Berkeley, and nobody talks about San Francisco State, City College, Ocean Hill, Brownsville, all the public, all the people's universities always get this, because now we have the elite universities who are speaking, who are producing knowledge, and so there was some, how do we see, and that was also very much connected with the fight against the war in Vietnam. And it was also, even though it might not have been called abolition, I don't think it was called abolition at the time, people were fighting. I mean, there is a history of abolition, I understand that. This is your expertise, not mine, so I'm not going to tread on that territory. But, no, but I think there was always the whole struggle about prisoners, always. I mean, people were in prison. 800 students at San Francisco State were in prison. 2 days ago, it was the 56th anniversary of the 700 students at Columbia who were in prison, again and again. So there is this moment in 68, the war in Vietnam, the demand for decolonizing the curriculum, for making the university accountable to the community, for breaking the so-called walls between the university and the community, and putting, and somebody also spoke about it in the first panel, making the universities so hierarchical and so expert that nobody, even people who are conducting the struggle, don't even know the analysis about their own struggle. They need somebody else from the university to come and do a research about them, and then produce it and say, this is actually what you said. And they say, no, this is not really what we said. But between that moment and what we're talking about today, what do you, I mean, how can we do you agree that we can actually construct comparative analysis without conflating context and so on? And what is it that we can think about what was happening then, what's happening now? Because there are, we think today that this is the only repression that's going on. We see nasty repression, but we know there was contemporary at that time. We know that people were assassinated. We know that people were kicked in the streets. We know that there was gentrification and so on. So I'm just wondering, is the difference really, we can talk about specific differences and so on. I mean, of course there are, but substantive. Or is it because we today imagine, since 1980 and Reagan's trying to roll over all the gains that happened in the 60s and say, this is not going to happen ever again, are we kind of like in a neoliberal moment today that people are so complacent to think, oh, this is really, really horrible because it hasn't happened before, and forgetting also all the years in between. How do we think about that?
Great question, and this will take us till the time where we have to leave. I have a lot of things to say. One is, even though there are profound shifts that we must all be attentive to, nothing comes from nothing. Everything has precedents, not necessarily precedents that can be compared as this object of facts and this object of facts, compare and contrast, but rather precedent as in this series of energetic interactions produce these kinds of outcomes, which then organized reality in such a way that certain kinds of people pursuing certain kinds of goals had advantages, and that means that others were forced, compelled, or inspired to develop or refresh certain kinds of oppositional activity or develop it again. I mean, this to me is, I mean, I'm a Marxist. This is how history works. I am a Marxist, by the way. Anybody in this room? Really? So as we look today at neoliberalism in the United States, we see so many elements that seem to have that seem to be the culmination of a complete qualitative shift that suggests history doesn't matter. But history can never not matter. Like, it can't. Not because of some idealistic notion of what history is. Yeah. Are you feeling me, Robin? But rather materially, like, you know, what kinds of efforts and struggles history has been made from. All right, so all that abstract stuff is to say, if we look at the student movement today, we can see, for example, we can recognize all kinds of resonances with the past. There are also resonances with past student movements that some of us know more about than others that might not come to mind but are equally important. For example, on Wednesday evening up at the Maisleys Documentary Film Center in Harlem, our comrade Kazembe, who's the executive director up there now, screened Finally Got the News on May Day. And in Finally Got the News and in the actual history of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, we see, learn about the resonance of the anti-racist, anti-capitalist struggle in and around the automotive industry and Arabs in America and Arab America and Palestine. And this is from 1970, but the school is not Columbia. The school was Wayne State. So there are resonances. We know that the free speech movement didn't start with Mario Savio, may he rest in peace. It started at a historically black college in North Carolina, did it not? That's where it started. So nobody suggests that Mario Savio ripped off some black students from North Carolina or South Carolina. Somebody remember which is which.
I think North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Maybe around Raleigh and you know, the Shaw University. And,
right. Yeah. But the point is that certain kinds of contradictions produce behavior, which is to say responses, that are built from struggles that preceded them and that therefore, you know, emerge as really similar kinds of activity, whether or not those activities are self-consciously connected. So Mario Savio and the brothers in North Carolina. Or all of the work that's going on today around land use and land control, wherever we look. Whether we're looking at South Africa, we're looking to Palestine, we're looking to Brazil, we're looking to Indonesia. These things are all connected, and whether or not people talk to each other about it, we can, as political analysts, notice similarities and then ask ourselves whether the energy that's concentrating in these places A, arises from the same kinds of conflicts, and B, might be connectable. And my view is, abolition gives us an opportunity to think the connections, not coalitions, the connections among all of these struggles, and to consider then where solidarity in the current conjuncture can emerge. And solidarity emerged before, Bandung, 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 and all of the movements before. Solidarity must emerge again.
Lenin and Baku.
Hey.
Yeah.
Hey. Lenin's my main man, as you know.
Can I have one more last question?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're talking about abolition, and there is rising. The country has the largest number of prisoners in the world, and now we have the number of Palestinian prisoners has more than doubled. Before October 7 and after October 7, we do not know how many prisoners in Gaza. We know that all the things that have happened and so on. So I'm wondering about two issues. How do we connect? I mean, I know in critical resistance and many places being connected, but it's also, there is like a lot of focus today on the campuses, and also I just say this, not just campuses, because with campuses without community support wouldn't work. So if people want to idealize the campuses by themselves, again, they're infantilizing possibly things, or celebrating only young people who are just waking up. But how do we do that? And how do we teach about it? How do we produce knowledge about it? How do we think about this for this, let's say the next stage for the Center for Place, Culture and Politics? How do we think, how do we do it in the face of fascism? I mean, we're here. So how do we do that?
We are here. We are here. Well, how? David's going to say, yeah, but why? How and why? These are mutually constitutive questions, the how questions and the why questions. So how do we do it? One of the approaches that I have been working through for years that constantly changes. There's no point in having an idea if the idea doesn't change. Like in its use. And that has been to think about the twinned forces of organized abandonment and organized violence. The concept of organized abandonment I got from two guys. One of them is David Harvey, who writes about it for like 2 sentences on page 397 of The Limits to Capital. You did. And I wrote it in my notebook when I read Limits to Capital 30 some odd years ago and started using it shortly thereafter. But I had heard it actually before that. I heard it in a lecture that the not-for-profit management guru Peter Drucker gave many years earlier in Claremont. Yes. And it kind of like I heard it, but it didn't stick. This is kind of what I mean also about ideas changing. So Peter Drucker would not have recognized what I'm talking about now, but I don't care. I'm still using the phrase. David does recognize, and then I've run with the phrase. And thinking about organized abandonment allows us to think across the entire range of how people become vulnerable and how people become conscious of the forces that have created their vulnerability, whether it's settler colonialism, resource extraction, gentrification, criminalization, forced migration because of climate, because of conflict, because of denationalization, is Javiela here? And others, because of other factors that have, as a young person said last week, and I'm embarrassed I can't remember his name, but I'll look it up, that other factors that have, quote, inflamed borders. I love that phrase, inflamed borders. That all of these forces are constitutive of organized abandonment, right? If a factory leaves, organized abandonment. If the mayor, the fascist mayor who is an officer of the law of the city of New York, cuts funding for education, healthcare, and libraries, that is organized abandonment. When the city of New York decides that putting in what's called gray infrastructure, which is to say large-scale capacity for the built environment to withstand the pressure, the wetness of the storms to come under climate change. When the city says, no, we can't do that anymore, it's too expensive, we have to convince the luxury real estate developers to do it building by building by building and give them rewards for doing it. That is organized abandonment. All of these things are organized abandonment. Now, all of the crisis and churn and displacement and vulnerability that these organized abandonment around the planet produces, pushes people out of their homes, out of their jobs, out of their neighborhoods, out of their communities, out of their relationships, into movement, whether the movement is to long-distance migration, short-distance migration, or something else. It interrupts, interrupts, interrupts. And that produces a social churn that the forces of organized violence have aggrandized to manage and control and create their own power over the last 40 or 50 years. They already existed, but they're more powerful today than ever before. They're more powerful today than ever before. Whether we're talking about military, private cops, public cops, they're all of them all powerful today, more powerful today than ever before. So it's in this clash at the edges, which can be really deep, really thick, of organized abandonment and organized violence, that people struggle. And what I propose is for us to think about abolition not as a way of more eloquently lamenting the miseries of this world, but rather turning inside out, think about and recognize and notice and build the various ways that people rehearse their own emancipation, whether it's in encampments, whether it's in pitched struggle in the street, whether it's in Abashali building houses in South Africa and defending communities, whether it's the MST doing land occupations, whether it's others doing building occupations, all of this, to me, is what abolition is. That's it.
Abolish the structures, the repressive structures. Yeah. So, are we, how you're the bosses? We're on time? Okay. So, just to conclude.
Okay.
Thank you, CP. And you know CP, like, you know, CP, in my mind, it's always Communist Party. I mean, like, that's how.
That's okay. All right.
Thank you for putting together. Again, we're having a very interesting day tomorrow, so people should be there bright and early in the morning. Don't sleep late. Telling that myself too. Thank you, Ruthie, for being you, for everything you're doing, for continuing to not give up, to study, to teach, to research, to expand, to think, to enable the imagination to run wild and run as wild as it is, and really, really build a cadre, if I may,
Love that word.
of scholars who are become mentees but become also colleagues that produce the kind of knowledge that is really necessary necessary and urgent in order for us to respond to today's world and to be able to fight the forces of fascism. So we will never ever not become afraid. We will become afraid, but to figure out how can we manage the fear in order for us to come collectively and build with each other. So, thank you, comrade.
I want to say something else because we have time,
I have something to do.
and then you can say some more. I want to say a few more things that I wrote down and forgot to tick off. The first thing is the day that Rabab and I met. Do we also meet at the airport? Because I don't remember that.
I think we met at the airport, and also I was working at the UN as a journalist.
Well, that's where we met on the
Had
street.
to do
That's where we met on the street. But I didn't remember meeting on the outbound part at the airport. All right. When I met Rabab in March of 1990, I was a dropout. Rabab mentioned Yale. I went undergrad to Yale, and I also did an MFA in dramatic literature and criticism. And I was done with that in 1975. I was out of school for a long time before I found my way to, of all things, geography. But so in 1990, I was a dropout. I just want you to understand, I wasn't a professor, I was a dropout. I was an organizer, I did a lot of work, I was in a million reading groups, all of that. But I was not a professional intellectual. And those of us who get to be professional intellectuals are very fortunate because there are many, many intellectuals in the world whom I encounter every day, most of whom do not get to be professional intellectuals, which doesn't make them any less intellectuals. So when I was in South Africa, for example, a few weeks ago, doing political schools with comrades in KwaZulu-Natal, outside of Durban, not in Durban, and also in Gauteng and Johannesburg. Many of the intellectuals who were part of that school were probably, but I don't know, modestly educated, which didn't make anybody any less brilliant than anybody who had had the advantages of a Rutgers education or a Yale education or a CUNY education. We all know this, but it's worth repeating out loud. That at the political school, we came together to learn together. It was no different from CPCP, right? So I was in charge, so I might have used a heavy hand and kicked somebody also. The point, though, was for us to, I'll just ventriloquize Marx again, to interpret in order to change, but also that meant that at every moment we were changing through interpreting as well. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, and I'm going to pick up on a note that David started us off with rather early on in reminiscing about Neil, who I didn't know when he was a grad student, was a graduate student at Johns Hopkins. Neil was my advisor, by the way. So I am David's dissertation granddaughter. Thanks, Gramps. But David mentioned how the practice produced the idea. And again, it's the dialectics of thought and action, of thinking and doing, you know, however you want to say it, however the summary of this dialectics is meaningful to you is what matters. So just as I don't walk into the center and think everybody should sit quietly with their notebooks open and listen, or that anybody should sit quietly while somebody pontificates, at the same time, listening is an art and a craft that we must all work on all the time, because practice makes different, and we become different listeners as we practice listening. And doing things better in the field, in organizing, demands better listening, better noticing, better seeing. I want to say one last thing, and then I'll give the mic back to Rabab. The poster and the bag, that, you know, fabulous swag, it's designed by my comrade, the great Shalene Rodriguez. And Shalene Rodriguez, who couldn't be here with us tonight and tomorrow because she's off doing something else, is somebody who has been in solidarity with Palestine, in solidarity with people, including herself, fighting police brutality, in solidarity with and active in the Puerto Rican liberation movement, in solidarity with so many struggles that all of them, I would say, that matter. Shalene is also a brilliant artist. She makes the most incredible art. And I'm really grateful that my old dear, dear, dear buddy, Howard Singerman, who's here, introduced me to Shalene some years ago. And Shalene and I teach together sometimes. She's an artist, I'm a geographer, and we have the thrill working together and working with our students, or a few people here who've taken our courses, to put together the demands that making art put on one's, an artist's capacity to notice, to see, to recognize, to understand, but also to do things, to manipulate, to change. And what geographers do, to notice, to see, to understand manipulation and change, to ask themselves the question, not where is Nebraska, but why is Nebraska? And putting these groups together changes everybody. And, you know, if I have a motto, it's change everything. I give it back to you.
Thank you. I wanted to, by the way, I was also a school dropout when we met. And I think we had the conversation one time when you were in grad school, and you were debating whether this was the thing to continue or not to continue. And I went to grad school. I actually went back to education because I thought people are not listening to me as an organizer. If I have DR in front of my name, people will listen. Honestly, I mean, really, that's the reason they do listen more. And I think it's also being able to actually understand all the various ways to do it. I want to say one last thing before I do my thing, what I want to do, is that it looks bad. It looks grim. It's over 35,000 people killed. People are under the rubble. We do not know where people are at. We are facing mass graves again and again and again. We're facing torture. all the things that are really gruesome, that many of us don't like to actually share images of or speak about, because I think even engaging in the politics of enlisting sympathy momentarily for emotional purposes rather than actually convincing also people. I mean, I'm not saying that emotions don't have a place, but convincing and winning people that this is really in all our interests. Justice is indivisible or our interest. I really believe that we will win. I really believe, and I do not believe that people will continue being steadfast under these horrible conditions after 77 years, after this huge, humongous massacre and killing that's going on. And we're inspired by movements also around the world. We're not the first. We're not going to be the last. We're not exceptional. We will win. It's just a question of us to be able to stand a little bit more, to resist a little bit more, to experience sumud, which is in Palestine, in Arabic, steadfastness, to stick with each other, support each other, have each other's backs. And this is actually what happened today, having the students speak, having you speak about the students and so on. For all of that, Ruthie Gilmore, I want to give you a symbol of Palestine. This is made in a Palestinian factory in Hebron. This is handmade. And you know, I don't give Palestinian things to anybody. I hate to pass on my part of our struggle. We are so honored that you are honorary Palestinian, not that we can give citizenships, but in the struggle as a project for liberation.
Now I am warm enough.
Thank you all.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for everything that you are. And congratulations. You deserve this. I hope that everything was being fair.
Fair? Yeah.
You reminded me of some things, by the way, the Geographic Association in San Francisco. There was so much stuff. The conversation we had in the office. I'm not going to do it now. Yeah. Should we do it? Oh, standing. Yeah, better for me. Thank you. You're going to share it with us?
Yes.
I keep forgetting to take pictures. No, really, I mean, this is really, it's just amazing. I'm so glad. And I'm so glad now personally that, you did struggle a lot. And you struggled and you fought against the powers that be. These are vindicated. That's the ultimate.
I was saying to some young people in this room a week ago, that, you all